Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Sattology, Debunking Mythology. And I have an amazing friend and guest who is a strategic expert, comments on leading issues, international issues, and has a very clear thought. And that's what matters in today's world. So without delay, let us welcome Sri Abhijit Iyer Mitra.
Well, thanks for having me on. I don't know if I'm an expert. I commentate, but I don't know if I'm an expert. But anyway,
For people like me, you are an expert because we don't know anything. Pretty much, we don't understand much. But anyway, I'll the American woke
this
culture.
whole thing about somehow foreign policy being this very complicated subject, this is basically just bullshit concocted by the foreign policy establishment to keep people out so that they can keep bullshitting about it. It's actually really simple, right? It's just that people bullshit around so much. There's just so much faux complication and faux nuance. So there is nuance, but then there's also faux nuance, right? And it's all about talking bullshit so that ordinary people won't get it. This is what Ayn Rand used to write about. Remember, it's like the emperor's new clothes. You make it sound very profound, and nobody wants to call it out for the bullshit that it is.
And they make up with terms like the Cold War. The Cold War is a very like a somebody listens to Cold War and hot war. I don't know what is this because the weapons are still hot.
So that's just really simple, right? Hot war is when you're actually fighting. Cold war is when it's like cold shoulder. It's take cold shoulder and take war, and you have cold war. So it's kind of like that.
That they make up terms like this where ordinary people do not understand. Pretty much it is the like one-upmanship. I'm better than you, and I have to constantly prove it. Isn't that like that?
When I was teaching in Australia, I always got told if your students didn't understand you, you're a bad teacher. So if anybody who watches this and goes away saying I didn't get that, it basically means I'm shit, not you.
So do you think that today's like America's woke culture is coming in a big way, woke culture, and which is going to slowly get to other parts of the world, and it's going to be in a way like Jai Shankar, Indian Foreign Minister, said that if the other democracies do not respect India, they might start doing the same things what others are doing. Do you think that's the beginning of an Indian, like they're standing up on it, something? What is that?
Yeah, look, Wokism is just really simple. If you want to deconstruct what Wokism is, don't go through all this bullshit Foucault and all that nonsense, right? Foucault used to talk crap mostly. There's probably about 1% truth that he fluffed up in 99% codswallop. So let me give you the simple version of what Wokism is. Basically, in a Europe that is post-religious, okay? Because religion and nationalism were deemed like, because Europe fought a European war called the 30 Years War. And then they fought a sort of another European war, which became the world war because of how globalized European empires were. So, you have this whole uh, thing that in the first thing, religion isn't so good. And in the second, nationalism isn't so good. And so you get a post-religious, post-nationalist Europe. Now, the problem is religion is a very important form of social control. Now, as much as I detest Rousseau and Voltaire, I think one of them said, if God weren't necessary, it would be we would need to invent him. And another one of them said, God is an optional extra, religion is an absolute necessity. And I completely agree, or maybe I said it, I don't know. So, this is the thing. I'm an atheist, but I do believe in religion. And there's a reason for it. Of course, in Hinduism, we don't see atheism as outside religion. We see it as a part of religion because at least you believe in something that there isn't a God. Therefore, you still believe. Now, what happens here is religion was something that developed organically over time. It's taken 30, 40,000 years of constant contact. At one point of time, for the first 30,000, 35, almost 37, 38,000 years, we were all shamanistic in that sense. And then, there's the development of theology and things like that, which, the more sophisticated the human mind gets, the more nuance and the more mystery we want to see in the unexplainable. And so theology just keeps getting more and more and more complex as the human mind develops. And it reaches the point where its social function is one of control, of keeping all the body parts functioning properly. And what happens with the wars of religion, the 30 Years' War and then World War II, is that you get to this post-religious society where you've gotten rid of religion in Europe, but what else do you have as a form of social control? What is to keep people from behaving like complete pricks, being nasty to everybody else, uh, uh, taking your freedom for granted to the point where you just want to step over other people's freedom? And what that leads to is something truly scary, a new form of social control, which is called Wokism. And mind you, Wokism has arisen. It is like socialism in that sense. It is like socialism is the politics of failure. Wokism is the social control by failure. So in any society, you have between, say, 3 to 7% who are meant to be at the top, what you would call what in religion would be called hierarchy, what in the Catholic Church is called ecclesia. And what ends up happening is that you have an economic situation where, about 90% of your population who are essentially not made for white collar jobs. I think we've discussed this on a previous edition of Sattology. Um, Intersect at a point where communism has been defeated. So this whole thing of godless communists versus God-fearing uh, capitalists, uh, the threat perception has gone down, and these two things sort of combine. And you have the empowerment of third raters, and I'm sorry to use that term because they really are third raters, uh, doing jobs that they were never made to do mentally. You need another huge psychological revolution for that remaining 90% to also be doing white collar jobs, even though the economy is sort of oriented towards white collar jobs. And that is what wokeism is. Wokeism is a perpetual pogrom. It's a pogrom of the mind. You're not going burning down Jewish houses, but you're essentially mentally, you're constantly engaged in cancel culture. Why? Because anything that offends you deserves to be cancelled, blacklisted, whatever. It's no different from a pogrom that way. So the religion changes, the cause changes, but that fundamental hatred that has to be directed somewhere, it's no longer pitchforks and torches, it's, Twitter and cancel and op-eds. But that's what wokeism actually is. And it's every little piece of shit trying to create their own little bubble to justify either their professional inadequacies or to justify the fact that they have serious, serious psychological problems that need serious psychiatric intervention. And they don't want to accept it. But that's basically what wokeism is. It's a very large scale community disease.
Can wokeism come in India? And so, like you mentioned, religion, but I differentiate between dharma and religion. Dharma can be logical, common sense, and scientific in many ways. Most of it is experiential, and that's why, as a Hindu culture, we do not discriminate. But do you think that Hinduism can be, or dharma is a logical antidote to wokeism?
It, in a sense, it is. So, see, here's the thing: in Hinduism, we've actually accepted 63 genders a few thousand years back. Okay, now the Hindu point of view is you know, okay, you're like pansexual or you're like asexual or whatever, congratulations to you. You're intersex or trans or whatever, that's perfectly fine. That doesn't come in the function of what you want to do. For a long time, we didn't even have a marriage law. Till India became independent, there was no Hindu Marriage Act. A Hindu could, if you felt sexually attracted to a telephone pole, you could technically marry a telephone pole. You still have people marrying dogs, people marrying trees in religious ceremonies, and it's just fine. Why? Because it's nobody else's business. Now, the point is for you to come and say, look, I'm telephone pole sexual, I'm attracted to telephone poles, and I am not getting a job because people find me weird because I'm attracted to telephone poles. That's the problem. You understand? And this is why wokes particularly hate Hinduism, because Hinduism said, fine, we accept your self identification of yourself, but this isn't so, there's no persecution against you. So their entire persecution narrative is completely busted by Hinduism. So you can't claim oppression then. You can't win the oppression Olympics then. You'll get a job based on how good you are, not based on which telephone pole you fuck. So, you know, your entire extortion scheme for getting a job because you're just plain shitty at your job, but you're attributing it to your sexuality of wanting to fuck a telephone pole, has just gone out through the window. So Hinduism, in that sense, is the complete uh, sort of antithesis to Wokism in that sense. Because if you have an oppression narrative, it ain't gonna fly in Hinduism because you want to identify as a transgender, psychedelic, violet hippopotamus that only wants to bonk gorillas. Great. Um, Wonderful. We identify you as a hippopotamus. Now, what more do you want? You want an award? Now go find yourself a job and earn a living. They don't want to do that. They want to victimize the fact that they think of themselves as a transsexual, psychedelic, violet hippopotamus. Uh, and sorry, buddy, that doesn't get you a free meal. They're basically lazy people, third rate people, good for nothing people who hate people who work, hate people who are normal, who lead normal lives, who have not let, and everybody has baggage. Everybody has trauma in their lives. Everybody has had a traumatic experience in their life. Everybody at some point has been oppressed or not. Not everybody, blames everybody else for their own problems. In Hinduism, you take responsibility for who or what you are. You don't put the blame on somebody else. It's your karma. Remember that. If you're a piece of shit, that's your karma. You did something to be born a piece of shit. And if you want better karma in the next life, try to pick yourself up from the shit in this life.
No, that's a right. I think that's the right way for them to understand, because all these philosophies are giving rise to in the campuses in a big way. And they came up all they have something to invent to revolt against, and this is something very illogical to revolt against something. And you rightly put it that dharma is an antidote to this. Truly, is an antidote to it. In the US campuses now, so what happens in the US campus today happens in an Indian campus tomorrow. How do you think the wokeism will affect Indian leftists?
So thankfully, wokeism hasn't really taken off in India that much. Uh, uh, because India is probably a country where even female emancipation hasn't happened completely, socially speaking. And even though you've had a lot of affirmative action and things like that for women, the women's laws that you've enacted have actually turned the jurisprudence of innocent until proven guilty on their head. They've gone from Anglo-Saxon jurisprudence to Napoleonic jurisprudence, where it's guilty until proven innocent, pretty much. So what happens out here is that you essentially have the people realize that you have two different legal systems. One for women, which is well, for crimes like, so for example, in India, if you enter into a relationship with a woman, and the sex is consensual, you both agree you're going to get married. Tomorrow, if you fall out of love, uh, and she claims that you, in fact, never intended to marry her, all the sex that you had together, even though it was consensual, is deemed rape. Why? Because it was sex on false pretenses of false promises of marriage, and therefore it is retroactively considered rape. And the backlash against this is happening. So, this kind of wokery in women's rights has gone so far that there's already a backlash against that happening. And this is the kind of environment that wokeism has to come into India. So there's absolutely no room for it, because the true feminists in India are like, boss, we have a long way to go because these stupid laws have done nothing for us. We're actually seeing a backlash because of these stupid laws. The last thing we want is your kind of balderdash coming into this country at the moment. And on the other hand, the same sort of faux feminists that were championing these kind of stupid laws, they also don't want wokery coming in at the moment, because for them, it's like, our fight isn't over yet. So we can't afford to have all this bullshit coming in and diluting our cause right now. So, it's a very complex thing.
No,
But basically, there's no prospect for it in India right now. You will see it, like there'll be the occasional freakazoid or schmuck who gives you woke rubbish, but mostly there's going to be nothing.
see, most of the times the anti-Hindu and because wokeism is definitely working against Hinduism also in many ways in the campuses, it is giving rise to fanaticism in the American campuses. But also, do you see most of the other countries, such as Israel, which has heavily anti-Semitic viewpoint sponsored by the church, obviously, in North America and other places, indirectly. I would not say directly, but yes, that is a sponsorship. But there is nobody to defend Hindus. Like there is a Holocaust Institute in New York. There's a Holocaust Museum, which is run to contest anti-Semitism, and there are other forums to contest anti-Semitism. For fake stories of many Islamophobic stories, there is a group to fight that. But for Hindus, there is nothing. Do you think that
And
India's
there's a very
foreign
good
policy?
reason for that, because on one hand, 75% of the Indian Americans or Hindu Americans who end up voting for Democrats, uh, for whom the base is wokery and Hinduism is your enemy. Indians are also the enemies of wokes. Remember that, because Hindus, the Vietnamese, the Chinese are a classic case of horrifically oppressed, genocidally oppressed races that don't play the victim card. I mean, tell me, what have the Vietnamese not endured? Tell me, what have the Chinese not endured? If it wasn't the genocidal Japanese army, the Chinese Communist Party killed 7 times the number of Chinese citizens that the Japanese Imperial Army did. Have you ever seen a Chinese person play the victim card? Have you ever seen a Vietnamese person play the victim card? Have you seen Hindus play the victim card? Even though we lasted under 1,000 years of absolutely horrific foreign rule, no. So, all these communities, they represent enemies of wokeism. Now, unlike, say, the Roman religion or Egyptian religion, which had a mythology but not a theology, Hinduism has a very strong theology that backs up this refusal to play victim. So, Hinduism, in that sense, is more than just a living statistical threat to the woke narrative. It is also a intellectual and theological threat to the woke narrative, which is why nobody wants to defend Hinduism. And of course, Indians are the biggest bunch of traitors you'll ever find. There's a saying: there was no need for the Muslims to invade, there was no need for the Brits to invade. because the Indians were so fucking supine. We just, you know, do you know at the time of the 1857 mutiny, what we call the First War of Independence in India against the British East India Company, how many white troops were there in India that crushed the revolt? 40,000 white troops crushed a country of approximately at that time 180 to 190 million people. I'll repeat, 40,000 white troops with the assistance of close to about 500,000 local collaborators crushed a rebellion in a country of 180 to 190 million people. And that itself tells you the nature of India. How else do you explain the fact that Turkic nomadic invaders are able to control this country almost continuously from 1190 to 1700 and something, so 700 years pretty much, with, even though the population overwhelmingly remains Hindu, outnumbers them by 3:1 in terms of religion, but much more in terms of the oppressive feudal class versus the commoners? You can't explain it, right? At least in Europe, the feudal control was democratized. You had hundreds of thousands of feudal families. So the corpus of feudal control was much bigger. During the Mughal Empire, 70% of India's revenues was concentrated in the hands of not a few 100,000 families like you did in Europe. It was concentrated in the hands of just 655 families. Literally 70% of the Mughal Empire's revenue was concentrated in the hands of 655 Indian families. Fact. Right? So there's many things in India. In India, we're constantly fighting amongst each other. There is no, what Huntington used to say, substance and salience. What makes up a country? Substance. What connects you and me? Salience. What differentiates you and me from him? We neither have substance or salience, nor do we have this sort of, and because we don't have the sense of belonging, we're pretty much willing to collaborate with anybody who comes and crushes us. Plus the fact that we've forgotten our own heritage, or that heritage presents a very real intellectual threat to wokeism.
When the Indian foreign policy makers make a policy, because India is the largest, I would say.
Sorry, just to correct you, Adi, Indian foreign policy makers don't actually make policy. They come out and fart a lot like a walking, talking biogas plant. I think if you want to miniaturize a large biogas plant, you just need to look at an Indian diplomat. But yes, okay. So we don't make policies. Yeah, okay.
Like, isn't it national duty of, because when the Hindus, like especially expatriates from South Asia, I would say India and Bangladesh, Nepal, and even Pakistan, a lot of Hindus from there, in the US, Fiji, and other smaller countries, they all look up to India to protect their rights globally. For Jews, there is Israel. For for Christians, it is Vatican. For Catholics, it's Vatican. For Christians, it's Church of England and other Protestant churches in the US. Hindus have no state backing them. I mean, where is the foreign policy? Or
There
it is,
is none. There is none. Do you understand? The inferiority complex in India runs so deep that even this government, that is allegedly a Hindu nationalist government, Hindu nationalist my ass, that will not even squeak when Hindus are being persecuted. So just this week, the Prime Minister went to Dhaka, to Bangladesh. He visited several temples out there, including my ancestral temple on my father's side, which is in Joshore, to Kali. It's the Joshoreshwari Kali temple. So he went to our family temple. And before that and after that, of course, before that, there were already anti-Hindu riots because he was coming. After that, the anti-Hindu riots have completely spiraled out of control. Not a squeak from the government about what's happening out there, not a squeak from any other government. So normally what happens is it's usually America and Britain that try to protect Hindus abroad, and not the Indian government, never the Indian government. Remember, after what Idi Amin did to Indians in Uganda, kicked all Indian origin people out, India didn't even want to step in. It was Britain that came in and took all the Indians. And today their home minister, uh, uh, the home secretary, Preeti Patel, is one of those people who got kicked out, well, the descendant of people who got kicked out from Uganda. India did jack shit. And even now, the so-called Hindu nationalist government will do jack shit. Why? Because it fears this Hindu nationalist tag, and it's more concerned about labels and tags than it is about actually doing anything. Okay, so this entire lesson, karmanyavadikaraste mafaleshu kadachana, nobody in this government has internalized it. They recite it, I'm sure, at any functions to pretend to be for Hindus, but they will never do anything about it.
Don't you think that it is like, for example, in my rough calculations, because Pew Research will never give out the real data. Pew Research calls all Hindus as agnostics, and I'm talking about American Hindus, like
Mm.
who are practicing Hinduism out of choice. Some of them do come out, like Will Smith and some movie stars like Julia Roberts, but most of the others don't come out because they don't care. But still, the Hindus are classified as agnostics. And see, the real power of Indian foreign, see, if Indian foreign policy really is there, or you can contribute, you have some say. But when Indians talk about Hindus abroad, especially in other countries, isn't that the responsibility? The first foreign policy initiative should be that promoting dharma or presenting dharma in a proper light, yoga in a proper light. These are the biggest foreign policy
Look,
issues we can fight on.
it's very important to not get into the micro, which is should we promote yoga? So, for example, Alabama bans yoga because they think it can lead to the witchcraft of Hinduism, whatever the hell that means. They ban yoga in public schools, right? Now, that is okay. Like, I'm not big on yoga anyway. Uh, I myself am an atheist. I eat beef. So, like most Hindu traditionalists, considered me like an impure piece of shit. And you know what? I don't give a shit about their validation. Uh, for me, my relationship with God or the lack of God is a purely personal thing. It doesn't involve anybody else, and I seek nobody else's validation. Nor do I give out validation to other people. People need to have an internal locus. Your sense of self, your sense of validation has to come from within. It can't come from without. Now, what happens out here is the government has to be very clear, first of all, about what are the Indic faiths, and that India is home to those Indic faiths. Because remember, Hinduism isn't the only dharmic religion, because Hinduism itself is an umbrella where you have 12, 13, 14 different schools of thought, including my own school of thought, Charvaka, which is staunchly atheist, right? But Jainism also is a dharmic faith. Sikhism is also a dharmic faith, even though it has a lot of elements of Abrahamism in there. It is fundamentally a dharmic faith. Buddhism is a dharmic faith. So at some point, the government also needs to take responsibility to protect all these faiths. But even today, the Hindu identification of itself as Hindus is being a Hindu transcending caste. Is it transcending region? Is it transcending language? Is it transcending your ethnic identity? Is not happening in India. It's gone up since independence. But today the BJP gets what? About 36% of the vote, which means still 64% of India are more worried about regionality, ethnicity, linguistics, than they are about Hinduism as a whole, which is kind of very similar to, that 25% of Hindus who vote Republican and the remaining 75 who don't really give a shit and vote um, Democrat, despite all the crap that Democrats hurl at us. So, it's also a sociological thing out here.
So one of the things which comes to the mind, and I think you put it very succinctly, and the larger concept that, because I was studying, I'm a close observer, because sometime in US the religion and politics is tied together. The foreign policy is made on religious grounds.
Mm.
Most of the people don't know it. All American policies are pro-Christian. That's why the organizations like USCIRF, which directly works under US aid, which is a body of the State Department of the US, comments on international religious freedom. Now, so that is being used as a leverage. The State Department works on leverages.
So here's the thing. I don't agree with that entirely, and I'll tell you why. Remember, the founding principle of American freedom of religion was very different from the French concept and the British concepts of freedom of religion, of secularism. I think we've discussed laicite and American secularism before, French laicite and American secularism. So French laicite is a militantly anti-clerical culture, right? They're as brutal with Muslims as they are with the Catholic Church. You can insult the Catholic Church outrageously. You are, in fact, required to insult the Catholic Church outrageously. Because remember, during the 1792 French Revolution, most of the nobility were also clergy, and they were sent to the guillotine, lock, stock, and barrel. Hmm. American secularism is different. These were people that were considered loonies, religious loonies, even by the British standards of their time, which is why they were kicked out of Britain in that sense, which is why they were persecuted in Britain. So, this is a completely different caliber of loonies where all loonyism has to be respected and be taken seriously and equally, and so on and so forth. We need to separate that. Second, with the USCIRF, remember, there's also the input. It's not the way American foreign policy is run. It is more what are the kind of trash that are getting into the USCIRF, Council for Religious Freedoms, which is mostly your woke trash who have basically been saturated with anti-Hindu narratives already, getting in there. And then a complete lack on the part of the Indian government in narrative busting. Because remember, the USCIRF only came to prominence in India when they started criticizing the Delhi riots of, when was it, January or February 2020, when Trump visited, as being religious pogroms. Now, here's the point. What were they to base on their assessment on? It had to be based on press reports, which the government was doing absolutely nothing, zero, zilch. This is why I told you we don't have foreign policy. We don't have foreign policy makers. We have, walking, talking, miniaturized biogas plants, essentially fart machines masquerading around as diplomats, who did absolutely nothing, nothing, zero, zilch, nada, to put out facts, to counter the narratives in the press, nothing. Even though many of us were picking up these lies. But look, a private person tweeting about it, even with a blue tick, is not the same as the government coming out and briefing people. So what are these people meant to base their assessment on? If not press reports, what else? So see, it's a sort of garbage in, garbage out. I won't see conspiracy. I'm generally, very, very allergic to conspiracy theories. I don't like conspiracy theories because normally conspiracy theories are all bullshit. So, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's just a cycle of third-ratedness on the American side, the institutional capture by a third-rate ideology for, by, and of the schmucks, contrasted with a bureaucracy for, by, and of schmucks in India. So it's schmuck meets schmuck.
The last point here is like the when we talk about the strategic affairs, do you think that this kind of philosophy affects the strategic imbalance in the world? Because it is like the atrocity reports and the things like these are, they drive the narrative, and the atrocity reports, we all know it's conspiracy theories, there's no fact over there.
True. No, in some cases they're actually happening. Like the Chinese Uyghur genocide is happening. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's happening. To be fair to the Chinese, they've done it to everybody, including non-Muslim Chinese citizens in the past. So it's not, to be fair, they're very secular in their genocidum. They don't pick and choose. It's just that this particular time, Muslims are the target of it. But its value in foreign policy is more as a sort of um, like fertilizer. It's not the actual grain that sprouts into grass, which then produces either wheat or rice. Because remember, wheat and rice are both grass varieties. Uh, it's more like the fertilizer that fertilizes the seeds of future recrimination and sanctions and whatnot coming up. That's number one. Number two is that it's a fantastic tool of destabilization, because Wokism creates the kind of social churn that invariably it's so severe when 90% of your population is involved in this social churn. It becomes very, very, very problematic, because 10-15% is normally the kind of social churn you need to uh, establish a new religion or a new system of government, like the Bolsheviks or something like that. And sometimes even 10 to 15% is too much. Remember the first and only free elections that Russia ever had, which was in what, 1920, or was it 1917? I forget now. After Lenin takes over, uh, the communists did not win a majority. They actually only got about 20% of the vote. And then Lenin dismissed the whole process as being irrelevant. So they actually countermanded an election. People never want to talk about that. But what ends up happening is that when you have 90% in churn, and when I say churn, I'm not saying all those 90% are third raters. It's more that, it's like this 86 million and 74 million split. I forget what was the vote split between Biden and Trump this time. I don't know. Maybe 84 million in 76 million. Uh, Half of the Biden voters are all the woke schmucks. The Trump supporters are a mix. I mean, they're not all nice people. There are some white supremacists out there. We have to accept that. But the rest of them are just good, ordinary Americans who are just bloody fed up of all this woke shittery. And of course, Democrats also have some sane people. It's just that it's been hijacked by the wokes. And there are lots of people in American government that I talk to who are genuinely worried, who feel that their own existence in government is under danger unless they mouth off these shibboleths to critical race theory and crap like that, which is very problematic for them because they no longer feel that they can be honest in government. And what that has done, this woke revolution is, and it is a revolution, make no mistake about it, it is an insurrection against the state. Just because it has not been violent doesn't mean that it's not been an insurrection and a coup against the American state, an ideological takeover of the American state, is that it is invariably going to lead to a civil war. Because the moment you have bureaucrats who are frightened to write the truth and send it up the chain, what is the genius of democracy? What is the genius of a free press? What is the genius of free thought? It is that it acts. There are two things that we confuse in a democracy. One is free speech and the other is elections. These are two distinct and separate, not connected elements of a democracy. The election process acts as a pressure valve. You don't like this guy, it doesn't build up over 70, 80 years, then blow up in a revolution. You just get rid of him. And what free speech does is it's like an AWACS, like, an airborne early warning system, because the earth is curved. Here, you can't see what's happening here. So what you do is you go up on a plane here and then you can see line of sight. You can see what's happening out there, right? It acts as an early warning system for um, grievances and oppression or whatever, real or perceived or whatever. Now, in America, you have elections, yes, but that freedom, the room for freedom of speech and thought is shrinking, 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 shrinking. And when the room for honesty shrinks, the only result of that is disaster and state collapse. It's really that simple.
Thank you. I think you put a lot of clarity on this subject matter, which is questioned by many students also, and most of us, because we sometimes we have to hear from an independent source like you to understand what is going on. But it has a far-reaching consequences for the whole world, because the first was the French who gave philosophies of leftism and rightism. And I always say I'm neither left nor right. I'm dharmic. I'm in the middle, and I can go either way because based on the position of the dharma in that side. So similarly, in the American, new philosophies are being invented daily, sometimes by the white
Okay,
apologists. I
okay.
can.
Again, Adi, to correct you, sorry. These aren't new philosophies. These are just new strains of fart. They're just pure, undiluted, gaseous shit, aerated shit. They are not philosophies. They're shit. Let's be clear about that.
The point is that these kind of thought processes, maybe whatever it is, they have a goal towards disturbing the good people, not the bad people, the good people, the intelligent people. The world is run by intelligent, good-hearted people, not by crazy people. Crazy people always try to destroy the world, the crazies. So there has to be an answer by the good people against them. What can be that answer?
I think the time for speech has ended and the time for action has begun. You've lost the battle of institutional control, make no mistake about it. The very fact that people in the Republican Party itself bought this entire Capitol riots narrative, which incidentally has now been disproven at every stage. Imagine the impeachment managers at in the U.S. House had to manipulate evidence even to try to connect Trump to what happened is telling. The fact that BLM terrorists and Antifa terrorists are allowed to crowdfund, but PayPal will disassociate with you if you're a Capitol Hill rioter trying to crowdfund, tells you the kind of institutional capture you are up against. This may not be 1917 and the Bolshevik Revolution, but understand what is happening to your freedoms in America. I have been an opponent of the Second Amendment my entire life for a set of reasons we've explained. But today, increasingly, I understand why, in the genius of the Constitutional Fathers, they put in that Second Amendment. Because understand this, your right to free protest and free speech in America has all but ended. You have lost this battle.
That's true.
If anything, it is only going to move more and more and more to the left. And there used to be a principled left, which I used to get along with fine. I subscribe to a lot of their ideas because I'm not a ideologue. I believe in common sense. Today, that left simply doesn't exist. Though some of the most informed criticism of wokery and this new left actually comes from the old left. But that's a dying breed. You don't have that anymore. Those old left have been cancelled. They've been deemed Russian agents and usually Russian agents. Nobody will ever say you're a Chinese agent. They'll only call you a Russian agent. Why? Because the new left is, it used to be, I remember this atlas of the world I used to have, where every country was defined by religion except communist countries. And the religion there was deemed communism. Moscow denomination communism and Beijing denomination communism. So the old left used to be Moscow denomination communism. The new left that you see in America is Beijing denomination communism, which is why I call Biden Beijing Biden. I know I shouldn't. I mean, it's a conspiracy theory, but I'm not implying a conspiracy. I'm just using it to, shit it. That's it.
Thank you, Abhijit, for this very clear conversation, and thank you, viewers, for watching and staying with us for so long. And do watch it on YouTube and comment. I know Abhijit is your favorite, one of the favorite speakers here. So do watch it, comment it, and ask us questions, and we'll have Ask Abhijit session next time. Namaskar and thank you.
Well, well, very well. Thank you.